All right, hello everybody. We were just listening to Dance Rhythmique by Ida Presti. So welcome to Herstory 2.0. My name is Kendra Harder. My pronouns are she, hers. And a huge thank you to the Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra and Mark Turner for hosting this class. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land where we are gathered and live streaming from is Treaty 6 territory, the traditional territory of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Dene, Saulteaux, and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the indigenous ancestors of this land and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We encourage you also to take a moment to consider the indigenous land on which you reside and offer a sense of gratitude to the indigenous peoples who stewarded this land and water long before us. And so before we begin today, I would actually like to take a moment of silence to honor the 215 children whose remains were discovered at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and the countless others who never made it home from the residential schools, and to honor and respect the Indigenous communities in mourning. For those of you who are unaware of Canada's history, for over a century, beginning in the mid-1800s and continuing into the mid-1990s, Aboriginal children in Canada were taken from their homes and communities and placed in institutions called residential schools. These schools were run by religious orders in collaboration with the federal government and were attended by children as young as 4 or 5 years of age. Separated from their families and prohibited from speaking their native languages and practicing their culture, the vast majority of the over 150,000 children that attended these schools experienced neglect and suffering. The impacts of sexual, mental, and physical abuse, shame, and deprivation endured at Indian residential schools continue to affect generations of survivors, their families, and communities today. So let us now pause for the next minute to honor those who have been found. To learn more about the residential school system, you can visit legacyofhope.ca for more information. And please consider donating to the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. And I'm just going to paste these links in the chat below. You are also welcome. Oh, that should have worked. You're also welcome to take a screenshot to find those web links. Yeah, so please visit those links. So also speaking of the chat, please we would love it if you would take a moment and tell us where you are all from. We love to know where everybody is tuning in from. Helping me on technology is Matthew Praxis, so thank you, Matthew, reprising his role. And you will also see in the box here, there's a spot for Q&A, and so you can put questions in there at any time, and I'm going to do my absolute very best to to answer this at the end of the class. the thing is, today we're having a very exciting topic. We're going to be talking about guitar, and so I've tried my best to keep it to a minimum, but yeah, so we're going to try our best to get to the questions. And to that effect, we have a special guest with us here today who will be joining us for a little bit throughout the talk. This is Willow. She is my pride and joy, and she'll be joining us to give a few examples here and there throughout the class. So, the guitar. So when I was preparing for this class, I was looking through my RCM books for guitar, so Royal Canadian Music something. And I own the preparatory to grade 8 books for the guitar, varying in the syllabi from like 2008, 2011, don't ask. But anyway, in my books, there was only one piece of music by a female composer. So then I thought, okay, well, these are old. Maybe we've done better now that it's, later. So I found the 2018 syllabus online. And there I only found 3 female composers. If we look at this little image here that I got courtesy of allmalepanels.tumblr.com, we can see just how heavily stacked the guitar world is with men. In certain guitar shops, I have encountered sexism, in a patronizing air from the men working the shops. And even growing up, I always felt that playing the guitar, I was just doing kind of a guy thing. So when I started doing the research for this class, I was really excited to start looking at female guitarists and composers. So what's also quite interesting is how the guitar and its cousin, the lute, were deemed sort of one of the few appropriate instruments for a woman, but then in the 20th and 21st century, it's taken over by men. So let's take a little look at some history. So as early as the 8th century, Arabian conquests brought captive women of various races and classes into slavery. Many of them were trained as singers and instrumentalists at the music schools of Hijaz and Iraq to supply harems of the nobility, not only with beauty, but with music. There were wealthy Christian Spaniards who also kept singing girls as entertainers. And you'll notice in this little diagram here, sorry, it's a little cut off because the person who scanned the photo had some issues. But in this, there's these 2 noble women you can see playing chess, and beside them is a servant who is playing a lute or an oud. Okay, so we're starting to see some trends here. But throughout history, we have numerous examples of women playing the lute or the guitar. Barbara Strozzi, like most women of her time, accompanied herself on the lute or the theorbo. And the theorbo is something I really want to learn how to play. It's like it's in the lute family, but it has some very low bass strings. Oh, it's beautiful. Be still, my heart. Continuing on, in the 17th century, noble women, heeding the example of the Queen Mother Anne of Austria, took up the lute and the guitar for their own private amusement. The piano, harp, and guitar were considered an instrument most suitable for the Victorian lady to learn. They were instruments for domestic entertainment and required no facial exertions or body movements that interfered with the portrait of grace the lady musician was to emanate. And so as a personal aside, I find this quite funny because I feel like when you are playing the guitar, you are sitting in the absolute opposite of a lady because you're sitting with your legs wide open. Like you got to fit that guitar somewhere. And then also, when you're playing a sweet guitar solo, you are totally distorting your face. So I'm just going to smash that argument right there. I mean, the whole argument can just be smashed because it's ridiculous, but that. So I'm going to show you guys some pictures. I'll show you folks some pictures of some historical guitars. And note there's a very important aesthetic difference between the ornate guitars of the 17th and 18th centuries, and then the sort of classic guitars of the late 18th and 19th century, similar to like what we see today, like with Willow. So I found this very interesting quote that said, in speaking of these ornate guitars versus plain guitars, that the former were to be seen and not heard. And these are instruments all right for the women to play. There are painters throughout the 16th and 17th centuries that would paint graceful portraits of damsels and their courtesans, literally displaying their hands on these richly ornate guitars. So yeah, all of this is just kind of give some context as how society viewed women and these instruments, the guitars. So I'm now going to give you a very brief and wanting history of the guitar, because it's the guitar. So the instrument as we know it finds its roots in Spain. And a very distinctive feature of the guitar versus the lute is that the guitar has single strings where the lute had courses or paired strings. So, I mean, this isn't the tuning that they had, but like E, so there'd be like 2 of those bass E's, 2 of those A's, D's, G's, and so on. And then with things like the theorbo, actually those bass strings were single strings, but they weren't attached to the fretboard. They would just be like bass notes that you would just pluck as you needed them, sort of thing. So yeah, here is a picture of the lute. And a standard Baroque lute would have 5 courses, but there's also talk of records of 10 and 13 courses of lutes that were very popular. So as the lute was gaining popularity throughout the majority of Western Europe, in Spain, it was already being overshadowed by 2 predecessors of the guitar, the vihuela and the guitarra latina. So in these photos, on the far left, we have a 16th century vihuela. Next to that are 2 17th century guitars. The one on the, I screwed up the right and left in my notes. The one on the left is from Paris, dated 1641. And then the one on the right is from Venice, circa 1670, and it is inlaid with mother of pearl. That's pretty fancy. And then next to that, those 2 photos on the far left are both the chitarra battente from Italy. There, the neck is also inlaid with mother of pearl, and then the sides and the back are decorated in ebony and ivory. So as the guitar is having its developments and whatnot, in the 17th century, the lute playing started to decline in Europe, like the rest of Europe. And this is because it was being very easily overpowered by the string orchestra, because it's not a very loud instrument. And so, yeah, we're getting these larger string orchestras. You're not going to hear that lute anymore. But as the guitars found their way abroad, they began to gain some acceptance, more in parlors and as accompanying instruments. And they were referred to as the Spanish guitar. And then here, these are more like what we see today. On the left is a Salomon guitar from Paris, 1760. And then on the right is a Torres guitar from 1882. And this is very much like, this is what we get now. So the guitarra latina was the base for the developing guitar, as in the Torres. Originally they just had the 4 strings, and then as developments went on, they added the bass string, so that the A, and then eventually the E. And so at the same time with this development of the guitar, there were Spanish virtuosic guitarists who were emerging. And one of the most notable ones is Fernando Sor. Yes, I'm talking about a man. It's just a part of the guitar history. I apologize. But Sor transcribed and composed works for the guitar. His method books are used today. I have played plenty of Sor. And anyway, so Sor toured across Europe and eventually England in 1809. Keep that date in your head. And thanks to guitarists like Sor, the guitar gained popularity and composers began to embrace it as a usable instrument. I like to think we're more than just usable. Anyway. So then in the 20th century, the guitar still had, some way to gain in terms of popularity, especially in terms of academia and the concert classical world. In Canada, actually, it wasn't until 1959 that the guitar was officially recognized in the academia and classical world, and a guitar curriculum was added to the RCM and the University of Toronto that same year. And so this was the first time in Canada that a university had taken the guitar on as an instrument, and possibly even North America. And so this was thanks to Eli Kastner. But going back to sort of more generic stuff, I have to talk Canada, guys. I can't help it. So thanks to great performers such as Andrea Segovia, Agustin Barrios, and Maria Luisa Anido, the guitar gained an unprecedented acceptance in the broader classical concert world during the 20th century through their teaching, touring, recording, and commissioning. And so Segovia became one of the greatest icons and relentless promoter of the classical guitar. He wanted to create a repertoire for the guitar, right? Because we didn't have centuries of keyboard music or violin music. He wanted to get a bigger audience, and he wanted to win the guitar a respected place in the great music schools, along with piano, violin, and other concert instruments. And the reason I bring up Segovia is simply because, well, he is going to be related a little bit to the next composer we talk about, but the advancements that he made and the recognition for the guitar that he made laid the foundation for Ida Presti's career as a guitarist. So now we're going to move on to the women, because that's what this class is about. But we have to do a story. Sorry, I forgot I'd put this in. I'll take a drink of water. All right, it is April 7th, 1924. And there's a man by the name of Claude Maintenon who attended the Parisian debut concert of a guitarist named Andrea Segovia. Wowed by this incredible music, he had a premonitory flash that his daughter would be a world-famous guitarist. May 31st, same year, same man. And his wife Olga Lopresti have a daughter named Yvette Ida Maintenon. Now, this Claude did not play the guitar. He was an accordionist. But after his Segovia-induced revelation, he wanted to learn how to play the guitar so that he could one day teach his daughter, who was yet to be born. Now, when I first read that, I thought, oh, that is so sweet, that a dad's going to learn how to play the guitar so his daughter can learn. But then as I dug a little bit deeper, I realized he's more on the scale of Clara Schumann's father, Friedrich Wieck, like not as bad, but like more on that side of the spectrum than just like sweet, doting person. But Ida's father was her primary music instructor, and he trained her in the necessary discipline of a virtuoso, and he would hold her for hours on end, sitting and practicing. At the age of 6, he began to teach her on a full-size guitar. And that's quite something, because a lot of young students, especially like when they're 5, 6, they do not play on a full-size guitar. They play on like a 3/4, or I think there's even smaller ones that they'll play, because that's a thick neck. Those are big frets. So that's impressive there. He also was assigning her the etudes from the 19th and 20th century guitarists such as Carcassi, Sor, and Aguado. He also utilized recordings, because we're now in the century of recordings, and he would take her to concerts and stuff. But he did not allow Ida any leisure time. And Ida would later say, I never had a childhood. But being the cunning lady she was, Ida would sneakily read comics away from the look of her father. But she loved him dearly, and Ida learned a lot from him. And in fact, she never had another teacher. It was just Claude. So Ida understood the guitar intuitively. At age 8, she played for the first time in public. At age 10, she gave her first concert in Paris at the Salle Chopin Pleyel. That's a different thing. At age 13, this is awesome, Ida had the opportunity to play for Andrea Segovia. And after hearing her play, he said, I can't teach her anything more. She shouldn't take advice from any other guitarist. That is pretty incredible. If Andrea Segovia says you are that good at age 13. So as a concertizing soloist, her prodigious talent was compared to Segovia. And at first, I thought that was really unfair, because she's 14 years old and Segovia is in his 40s. But here's the best thing. A.P. Sharp writes in 1938 that the better guitarist is here, and she is the child of only 14 years of age. There are 2 recordings that were of Torbo's Sonatina that were compared, a 1927 recording of Segovia's and a 1938 recording of Presti's. And the comparison reads, the musicality is so comparable that it is easy to forget that one performer is a young teenager. Like, props. But sadly, Claude died in 1938, and so at the age of 14, Ida then became the head of the family. She had to care for her mother and her little sister and continued to perform, keeping her family afloat with a very meager income that she could find. When World War II came, her artistic career was suspended and her future concert tours were cancelled. But in 1941, at age 17, she travels alone to Indonesia for a 3-month tour. At age 19, she married Henry Rigaud, and they had a daughter named Elizabeth 1 year later, but they divorced soon after. So there's just some little historical things about Ida. We'll get into them a little bit more, but I would like to talk about Ida's mad skills. So being in the era of recording, she had recordings, but these recordings were made in an era before we had tape editing or digital editing for sure. So every mistake was recorded, but there were few. On her recordings, there's a noticeable lack of misfretted notes, string noise, buzzes, or other mistakes. And I hear string noise on like recordings by huge professionals even today. Like it is hard to not get string noise. So that's pretty cool. She had a very unique approach to the guitar, actually. She played with the right side of her nail and not the left, like a lot of people do. Like most people will play with the left side of their nail. And also her hand position to the bridge was different. And this is amazing. Okay, I gotta pull out Willow here. She could hold down 4 E's on the fretboard. 4 E's. I would like to show you how absolutely impossible this is and how I am just floored. So like there's playing 4 E's, no problem. Fretting is a whole other thing. Oh, can you guys see me? I might need to back up. Okay, I'm gonna back up so you can see this. All right, so how she does it is she frets these notes, but then also she gets this E all the way up there. Like even with just these two held, I cannot stretch my finger up to that E, let alone like this E here, I want to use my pinky for. I don't want to use my ring finger. Like, that is amazing. Check this out. That is amazing. Her unusual ability to stretch could have been because she had her early education on a full-size guitar, but there was a student that later recalls that the webbing between her fingers was very low, making it look like she had super long fingers and small palms. But she was an excellent guitar player. She had the best tone. There's only one person that could match her in tone, and that was Alexander Lagoya, who we will get to. She also could produce a variety of tones with a correspondent amplitude of dynamic range that nobody else has matched. And with guitar and the dynamics, for us, like the minute we strike something, it just starts to die away, right? So there's no crescendoing of a held note, nothing like that. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. So in regard to that, how she would have accomplished this was some cross-string trills or things like that, which she's actually reported as having developed the technique on that, which I find astounding. I'm just like, what? All of the techniques that I learn, I just assume they've been around since the beginning, but no, it was developed by her and Lagoya. Not sure who's who. So usually when people would do a trill, right, they would just right on the same string like that, but as you can see, that dies away. If you do a cross string trill, I haven't practiced this much lately, so I apologize. Anyway, if you can get that going, you can get a nice crescendo and all that because you are continually, stroking the strings, and it's, yeah, very cool. She was a phenomenal sight reader. Sight reading, she could play at tempi with an immediate instinctive and penetrating insight into its meaning. Alice Arts says she could sight read anything better than anyone else could perform it. And then another technique that she is attributed to having developed was the pizzicato on the guitar, which is more like a palm mute if we're using kind of like normal, or not, pardon, modern lingo. So let's just take something like this, like, so that's open. So pizzicato is then you mute the strings with your palm at the bridge. And I definitely did not think that was something that was a new technique. No. It pretty much kind of is, like, relatively. I thought that was so cool. And we definitely heard lots of pizzicato in that dance rhythmique piece that was playing when we opened. Anyway, that's her mad skills. So, in 1951, Ida met her alter ego, Alexandra Lagoya, who is another world famous touring artist, and actually kind of note. People like Segovia, Lagoya, Soar, I've heard of. I had never heard of Ida Presti until I saw her name on that syllabus. Like, so sad. Anyway, her alter ego, Alexandra Lagoya, oddly enough, both Ida and Lagoya had developed similar techniques under completely different circumstances. And that is the right-hand side of the nail, the different position of the hand to the bridge. And so their shared interest in music soon led to marriage in 1952, a son in 1953 named Sylvain Lagoya, and also in 1952 they started appearances as a stage duo. And the emergence of this duo was quite something at that time, to have two phenomenal guitarists in duo playing concerts. They had tours all over the world. And they continued to follow in Segovia's footsteps by expanding the instrument's repertoire. So Lagoya so they played both early music and contemporary music for the guitar. And so Lagoya would transcribe early music pieces for their duo, such as an Andante Verrier for mandolin and harpsichord by Beethoven. He then transcribed for the guitars. But then Ida created originals. And so, for your listening pleasure, is the Danse de Villa by Ida Presti. I hope you guys enjoy it. So the piece continues. I really wanted to play it all, but there's just so much exciting stuff to talk about. So definitely, I highly encourage continuing the rest of that piece. It's so good. I love Ida Presti's music. So unfortunately, though, Ida Presti died very young. In the middle of a North American tour, she became ill. So a doctor was called for, but there didn't appear to be any grave symptoms. So Ida and Alexandra continued on to their next gig in Rochester. But while they were on the plane, Ida became ill again, and so she was rushed to a hospital in Rochester. The surgeons operated immediately, suspecting a lung problem, but sadly she died on the operating table. She wasn't even 43 years old. So John Duarte, another guitarist, he writes this: the tragedy of Ida Presti was not only in her numbingly unexpected death at the age of 42, but also perhaps more, that the world was so slow to recognize her talent. If any guitarist ever merited the description of impeccable, it was she. So to end my little bit about Ida Presti, I want to end with the words of Alexandra Lagoya, who says, sensitive, passionate, with extreme seriousness, she was a genius. No guitarist in my whole life has moved me like she has. She was the music in persona. I believe she was the best guitarist of our century. She was something inexplicable. So for the next guitarist, we're actually going to move back to the previous entry and talk about Catharina Pratten, who is a true gem of the guitar world. Also somebody I have seriously just discovered. So excited that I did, though. So she was born Katharina Josefa Pelzer in Mulheim, and she was the oldest sibling of 7. So I have a little quick note here about her birth year there. There are a lot of varying accounts as to whether she was born in 1824 or 1821. On her gravestone, they say that she would have died at age 74, so that was in 1895. So then you'd think, oh, okay, 1821. But then her birth certificate reads 1824, not to mention that there are the accounts of the concerts that she went on. It corresponds more with her birth date in 1824. So that's what we're going with today. I could be wrong and it's still 1821. Who knows? But so her parents were Marie Legrand, who was an operatic singer, and Ferdinand Pelzer, who was also a guitarist and musician. And he also was a co-author of the first guitar magazine, the Julienad. Her parents would actually play duets of opera arias together. So Ferdinand on the guitar and Marie on the voice. And I just love this because when I was growing up, my parents would play piano organ duets, and it was one of my favorite things. So that is the best thing, to see your family making music. So I'm just so happy that was in Katarina's life. So from early on, Katarina was very drawn to the guitar. She has this memory of when she was an infant where she would rock her cradle to and fro until it fell over. And then she would crawl on over to the by-standing guitar just so she could sound the strings. Katarina was taught the guitar by her father, and she was definitely a child prodigy. By age 7, she had achieved significant mastery of the guitar, and she could already play Giuliani's Third Guitar Concerto. I cannot imagine playing a guitar concerto at age 7. Just going to put that out there. That's amazing. Around the same age, Katarina was presented in public in London at the King's Theatre, just 2 years after the family had moved to England. So in the 1830s, London saw many great guitarists come through there. Fernando Sor, who was on his second tour, Giuliani, and Wunderkind Giulio Rogondi. And who should start to perform with said Wunderkind? Katarina. And so, yeah, they were soon playing duets at Hanover Square, and their youthful appearances and clever performances created quite the sensation. When they would play together as youngsters, They were sort of thought to get lost on the stage being so small. And so in order to see them better and be heard better, they were mounted on a table. And yeah, there's this picture here. I quite love this one of Katarina at age 9 with the guitar. Like, she's so small. And that guitar is so big. Anyway. So throughout the 1830s, Katarina would have toured through Europe and England, concertizing, and often in duet with Rogondi. In a London review of her performances, it reads, "Her touch is powerful and her execution wonderful. We were surprised how such tiny fingers could draw forth such perfect sound." Now, this story I quite like. I don't know from particularly when it is from, but this is great. So as a girl, Katarina disliked this torture endured from having her hair curled. I get that. So on the morning of an important concert, she rebelled against the tyranny, and she set off across the street to a hairdresser and had them cut off all of her hair. So good. And then, of course, she had to perform with that, her new hairstyle. So moving on a couple years. So at age 17, Katarina was encouraged by one of her patrons, Lady John Somerset, to settle in London and establish herself as a teacher. Lady Somerset had taken a great fancy to Katarina, and so she provided her with apartments in her residence where she could teach, and then introduced her to different nobility as students. And over time, she had some pretty high-end students, including Ernest Shand, the aficionado Dr. Walter Leakey, and one of the daughters of Queen Victoria. We will putting a pin in that. We're going to get to that later. But this kindness was never forgotten, and Katarina saved many mementos of Lady Somerset. In 1854, Katarina married flautist and composer Robert Sidney Pratten, and they were kind of a power couple because he was sort of like really high in the world of the flute, and she was very high in the world of the guitar, and they were greatly admired and respected for their respective work. So after she had married Katarina, then her professional name was Madame Sidney Pratten. Katarina dearly loved Robert. She said, "My married life was heaven upon earth." And Robert was incredibly supportive of Katarina. So he was employed at the Royal Italian Opera. So after a night of work where he would hear some of the grandest opera compositions, he would come home and ask Katarina to play for him. "Chickie, let me hear your last piece," he would exclaim. On occasion before a performance, Katarina would become overcome by nervousness. So Robert would attend, sit in the front row of the audience, and give her confidence by gently marking the rhythm as she played, which detracted her attention from the sea of faces around her. Sadly, though, Robert died in his 50s, about 15 years later. In the first year after her husband died, Katarina was completely prostrated by grief, and she almost had to relinquish her profession, despite her dedication to the art of the guitar. She writes that, "At that time, I thought I should never write another note." But with time and the support of her friends, she recovered and returned to her work. And she remained in London, teaching, composing, and performing. So Katarina's compositions for the guitar were different from any that had been written before. She introduced new effects, arranged phrases and combinations of notes and chords that showed the capabilities and the beauties of the guitar in a manner that was entirely new. She wrote over 250 compositions, and she published 3 guitar methods. The Madame R. Sidney Pratten's Guitar School, including 236 examples, a 2-part exhaustive treatise. She also wrote The Guitar Simplified for her amateur students who would find the former too complicated. And then she also wrote the instructions for the guitar tuned in E major, which is an alternate tuning, or scordatura, which allows for some very unique sonorities in some pieces, but then also for some of her beginning students, it would allow them to just focus on timbre as opposed to maybe some difficult fretwork. I'm going to grab our guest here. But at the time, it was pretty wild that Katarina was writing in alternate tuning because, like, it's commonplace today that people will, like, they'll play in dadgad or like drop D, all these different kinds of things. But I conferred with another guitarist, Emma Rush, who is from Hamilton, Ontario, And she wasn't quite certain when alternative tuning sort of came in, but it was pretty wild at this time. So I'm just going to put up a little piece here. Just going to make sure I can see it. So this is something from the E major book. So to play it on a standard tuned guitar like mine, it would be something sort of like this. Yeah, sorry. Sorry. So I'm now going to play it in E minor, and you're going to get a sense of just how much easier that would be for a beginning student, but then also listen for how much more the guitar resonates with itself, because the strings and the body really resonate in kind of its natural tuning, as it were. That's right. Here we go. Next slide. So the listening that I have, the first listening I have here for us is a concert work that she would have written with the E major tuning. And so this is a tune that is variations on the French song Marbre s'en va en guerre, which was a very popular song in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so in this delightful work, the warmth of, sorry, I can't read from this far away. In this delightful work, the warmth of sound and breadth of tonal possibilities created by the sympathetically resonating strings is brilliantly exploited. So I've got a little information about the recording before Matt plays it for us here. So the reason I chose this particular recording of the Fantasie, I'm so excited. Okay. The Fantasy on Marlborough. This particular recording, the guitarist actually had two guitars that had belonged to Pratten. And the one that he plays this song on was her favorite guitar, which was this anonymous French guitar. She loved it so much. There was just something about its tone that she just loved over all of her other guitars. And so like she wouldn't let other people touch it because she's just like, this is my baby. And just another small note for those of you with perfect pitch, the recording is going to sound in E flat as opposed to E, and that is because he would have loosened the tension on the strings, which was another practice that Katarina really encouraged her students because it does create more resonance. So one time I was kind of thinking about tuning down a little bit, but then because I'd already started working on the piece and I have like relative perfect pitch, it was too different and I couldn't do it, so I just tuned back up. Anyway, this is the Fantasia on Malbrook, and it's the first move, or the first little bit, the intro, Festesso. Another little note there, you would have heard in the bass there that bum ba bum ba bum on the sol and the do, and with having the guitar in the E major tuning, she's actually able to play those notes both open, or otherwise to get that B you would have to fret it somewhere, and so that actually makes it a lot easier than to play around. So very cool. So I have a little theory I'd like to share with you all. I haven't seen it anywhere else. I also didn't look very hard, but I have this little theory. So in the memoir of Katarina's sister, Julia, she records how once one of Katarina's female students was so beautiful that it was difficult for Madame Pratten to keep her eyes and thoughts on the lesson, and she was constantly drawn to look at her and study her features and expression. And I read this and I was quite excited about this little tidbit, because it brings up the possibility that Katarina may have been bisexual or maybe gay. And really, you wouldn't have seen any other records of it, especially by Katarina necessarily, because you wouldn't write about such a thing at the time, because it was still illegal in England at the time, and there was so much discrimination against gay and lesbian people at the time. One of the most, right now anyway, one of the more famous lesbians of the 19th century, Anne Lister, all of her journals about her lesbian activities were actually in a code so that nobody could read them if they did find them. And so I'm not surprised I can't find anything else. But anyway, it's just my little tidbit out there for a little bit more representation, because it's kind of exciting, but it is just my theory, so. So I'd now like to circle back around to talk about Katarina's very high society student, her Royal Highness Princess Louise, Marchioness of Lorne, who was one of her pupils, and was also a patron of some concerts. And so the princess often took her lessons after dinner, and so at 11 p.m. would send for Katarina. And so usually Katarina would hire a carriage to take her to Kensington Palace, but on one occasion, General Landers gave her the use of his. And so upon this occasion, her coachman's livery denoted the master's official importance. The guard at Kensington Palace accordingly saluted as she entered the gates. It was an honor that Madame Pratten was always pleased to relate, as she was ever to narrate an amusing episode. Her most well-known works today are her character pieces, which were also very popular at the time. Her works include didactic pieces, as we already mentioned, so teaching pieces. She'd also have works inspired by events in everyday life. She also had stuff inspired by her love and later her loss of Robert. And then there's also some very imaginative sketches as well. And she actually, where did I read this? Sorry. She reveled in her descriptive pieces of fairies and witches. So her fairy sketches are inspired by folklore, and they also demonstrate her easy command of the instrument and her characteristic musical language. So the recording we're going to listen to is by Emma Rush, and she says that it's very fun to play these sketches. And what draws Emma to Pratten's music is that you really get a sense of her personality. And in an interview, she said, the more Pratten that you play, the more you feel like you're friends with her. So the piece that I'm going to have Matt set up for you is Fairy Sketches, Puck number 2. We're going to listen to the whole a little bit. And a huge thank you to Emma Rush, who made that video. And if you would like to hear more of the fairy sketches, they are also on her album Wake the Sigh, which is all music by 19th century female guitarists. I would highly recommend it. So Katarina was a constant visitor to Brighton for many years. And this was because she really suffered from fatigue from overwork. And so just to kind of like rejuvenate and just kind of get some mental healing, she would spend the weekend there. She loved the seafront at Brighton, with its ever-changing population and eccentric people that would walk around. But even then, when she should have been resting, she invariably took an instrument and some manuscript paper, and the sea would enliven her, and she'd just have to get to work. She also had she was very social. She would have people over, and they would talk like art, history, math, anything, and she would share her anecdotes. Ooh, and I'm doing really good on time, so I can share this great story that I heard of hers. I had to take out. This has nothing to do with Brighton. I'll get back to Brighton. But there's this story that this one time she was walking down Oxford Street, and she saw this woman walking. It was a mother with a newborn, but the mother wasn't wearing any shoes. And so Katarina, she stopped and she chatted with her. And after chatting, she gave the woman her shoes. So then she went home in the cab shoeless. So good. She's so wonderful. Anyway, back to Brighton. So after one of her last important recitals, the effort was just too much, and her health suffered considerably afterwards. So shortly before she died, she paid one last visit to Brighton in hopes of regaining her strength. But on this visit, she did not bring her guitar. She was too ill to play, and this was the first time she had gone to Brighton without an instrument. So Katarina died in early October of 1895. But her love of her profession compelled her to teach almost to the very last. Her funeral was held at Brompton Cemetery, and it was very largely attended. So I'd like to end with this quote here by Katarina. She says, "I have never sought publicity as a matter of vanity for myself. I've upheld my dignity for the sake of the supposed slight of my beloved guitar, which I felt was, should, and might be the future poetry of human souls." So, are there any questions? Are there any questions? Well, while we're waiting, a huge thank you to Willow. Sorry, Willow. Very huge thank you to Willow. All right, questions. Shout out to Cynthia Milani for her excellent Presti record. That is actually another great record. That is from Emma Rush. Hi, Emma. Such a geek. Sorry. Yes, Cynthia Milani. I found her record on Naxos. It's very good. She has a dedication to Ida Presti, and on there are also pieces that were dedicated to Presti by other great guitarists of the time. Can't remember the name of it. I think it's even just like a tribute to Ida. It's very good. Any contemporary women composers of the guitar? So to that, I sadly don't have any specific answers. So with the guitar, we do see a lot of modern composition by composers who aren't guitarists. And so I wanted this class to focus on those who were virtuosis and guitarists, because I feel, no slight to the other composers, but they do write much better for it. But anyway, yeah, I don't know any modern ones, but I haven't done enough research. But actually a great guitarist to look out for, her name is Gigi, and she commissions lots of works for the guitar, and she is phenomenal. Emma has some clarification on the Cynthia record, which is all music written by or dedicated to Ida. That's right. There's both on there. And Cinzia herself also dedicates a piece called, what was it, Quattro on Me, dedicated to the 4 E's that she can fret. Oh, yes. Emma also says, Annette Crisbrink. Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. I actually have a book that she edited. My brain is terrible. Rosemary asks, what is your favorite piece of music you like to play on the guitar? I love music by Agustin Barrios. Male composer, I'm sorry to disappoint, but beautiful, beautiful repertoire. Yeah, because Julia Florida is one of my top favorites, and right now I'm working on his La Cathedral, which is one of the most beautiful pieces for the guitar ever written, in my opinion. Emma also says, Emma's the person who can answer us about the modern guitar players because she does lots of work with modern living guitar or living composers. Also mentions Dale Kavanagh. So Ethan asks, were there any unique or controversial techniques in Pratten's treatises that were new to the guitar world at the time of their publication? I don't know specifics about the other books, but I do know that the book in E major, Scordatura, that was pretty new. Like there's just not really anything else like that. Yeah, but I haven't actually taken a look at the treatise myself. I did find it, but there's all these ugly like coloring marks that someone did on it on the scan. Yes, I do also compose guitar music, but not as well as Ida or Katarina. I'll say that much. Oh, it is warm in here. It is 38 degrees here today, guys. Like, I am dying. I hate the summer. I wish it was the fall. All of Saskatoon is going to kill me now. Well, thank you for your questions. I'm sorry I couldn't answer them better. But please also, if you have more questions, please feel very free to message me on social media. And if it's during the week, I can like maybe do a little bit of typey research. Yeah, but thank you all for being here and for being such great listeners. Hope you enjoyed my foray into the guitar. I can't believe I got that in on time. Yeah. Anyway, you guys have a great rest of your evening. And for those of you in Saskatoon, I hope you have air conditioning. Have a good night, guys.